This was not an accident. He did not trip and fall and find himself upon George Floyd's knee and neck. He did what he did on purpose. And it killed George Floyd. The motto of the Minneapolis Police Department is to protect with courage and to serve with compassion. But George Floyd was not a threat to anyone. He wasn't trying to hurt anyone. He wasn't trying to do anything to anyone. Facing George Floyd that day, that did not require 1 ounce of courage, and none was shown on that day. No courage was required. All that was required was a little compassion. And none was shown on that day. What the defendant did to George Floyd killed him. It was ruled a homicide. The defendant is charged with murder. He's charged with murder and he's charged with manslaughter. The defendant at the time was a police officer. Okay? It may be hard. It may be hard for any of you to imagine a police officer doing something like this. To be very clear, this case is called the State of Minnesota versus Derek Chauvin. This case is not called the State of Minnesota versus the police. You need to set aside the notion that it's impossible for a police officer to do something like this. The defendant is on trial not for being a police officer. It's not the state versus the police. He's not on trial for who he was. He's on trial for what he did. That is what he did. That is what he did on that day. 9 minutes and 29 seconds. He didn't follow training, those hundreds of hours of training that he had. He did not follow the department's use of force rules. He did not perform CPR. He knew better. He just didn't do better. The chief of police testified. He violated their use of force policy. He violated their de-escalation policy. He violated the duty to render emergency aid. No. You heard the trainer, Lieutenant Mercel. We don't train this. This is not who we are. What the defendant did was not policing. What the defendant did was an assault. Defense claims that he was non-compliant. Lane orders Floyd to put his hands on the steering wheel. He does. That's not resistance, that's compliance. Lane orders Floyd to get out of the car. He does. That's not resistance, that's compliance. They order him, they want him handcuffed. He is handcuffed. That's not resistance, that's compliance. They tell him to go over to the dragon walk. He goes over to the dragon walk. That's not resistance, that's compliance. They ask him to sit down. He sits down. Not resistance, compliance. Not trying to escape, not trying to evade arrest, not trying to assault anybody, shoot anybody, stab anybody, punch anybody. No. Compliance. Sits down on the ground. They ask him his name. He gives his name. He spells it. That's not resistance. That's compliance. They ask him to get up. He gets up. They ask him to go across the street. He goes across the street. Right, where's the resistance? Would, but for the defendant's actions, pushing him down, would George Floyd have died that day? Was it drugs? He just miraculously die of a drug overdose in that time? Maybe it was the tailpipe. Maybe it was his enlarged heart. Maybe not. Use your common sense. Use your common sense. Believe your eyes. What you saw, you saw. There were multiple moments in time, ladies and gentlemen, multiple moments in time that things could have gone different and George Floyd would have lived. But his negligence goes beyond his intentional assault of Mr. Floyd. His negligence includes his failure to act. In your custody means in your care. In your custody means in your care. There is a duty to provide medical assistance. That duty includes not only calling the ambulance for somebody else to do, it means that you have to use your knowledge, your training as a first responder. You're required to perform CPR. It's a requirement. He failed to do it. He had the training. He knew how to do it. You've seen his training records. It's Exhibit 119. You can take a look at all of the in-services, all of the hours. Right? He knew what to do. He just didn't do it. He could have listened to the bystanders. He could have listened to fellow officers. He could have listened to his own training. He knew better. He just didn't do better. This case is exactly what you thought when you saw it first. When you saw that video, it is exactly that. You can believe your eyes. It's exactly what you believed. It's exactly what you saw with your eyes. It's exactly what you knew. It's what you felt in your gut. It's what you now know in your heart. This wasn't policing. This was murder. The defendant is guilty of all 3 counts. All of them. And there's no excuse.